Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanako for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
Omari, I just found out you covered soccer in college at Michigan State. Why? 52, 3 episodes, whatever, we're into this, and I just found out you cover soccer?
I covered everything at Michigan State. I covered field hockey. I covered women's and men's basketball, football. I did volleyball for a full semester. I did some soccer here and there. I did baseball here and there. It's easier to list what I didn't cover at Michigan State, honestly. So soccer was one of the things on the list. So shout out to Bobby from MSU Athletic Comms, who still remembers all that from way back. I graduated in 2016, so it's been a few years.
I love it. I love it. We're not here to talk about soccer, though. I'm sure we have some soccer fans. I haven't watched soccer in a long time, Omari, but we're here to talk Pistons NBA trade deadline. We just want to get it out of the way. On Tuesday's episode, we'll drop a normal weekly episode on Tuesday. We will talk about the NBA at large. There's a lot of trades that went down that will be fun to talk about, Omari, from KD to Kyrie and everything in between. We're here to talk about Saddiq Bey to the Warriors, to the Hawks, and James Wiseman coming back to the Detroit Pistons. I know one thing that fans are really interested in, Omari, is this something that's been developing for days? Was it something that just happened this afternoon? I know that it's been, we talked about it on Tuesday, that Bey may actually have been the most gettable Detroit Piston. So can you let the listeners know kind of how this thing developed?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of a surprise, honestly. I mean, we talked about earlier this week, Saddiq probably being the most gettable of that core for various reasons. And, I think, to swap Saddiq Bey for James Wiseman is probably not the deal I would have had circled for the Pistons going in. I think when it came down to it, he was, and I've reported, I said this earlier today, I reported this in the past, that James Wiseman was number 1 on their draft board. And I think for Troy, just to be able to gamble on that upside, when you have a guy in Saddiq who, he's a fan favorite and he has some really big games here. But, we've talked about this as well. Sort of what type of player does he top out as, right? And, I think long term, a lot of people would agree that James Wiseman probably has more upside, but Saddiq's also better right now, right? So I'm not saying this is a home run or anything. I think it could be one, but it'll take time to see how this plays out. But even a few hours before the trade was official, it sounded like there was some skepticism that it would have went through. So eventually the Pistons just decided, you know what, let's just do this. I don't think this was anything that they necessarily saw as like a shoe-in trade up until they decided, let's just go ahead and do it.
I wonder what else they were kind of playing there for. I know the John Collins stuff's been thrown out there, but, almost sounded like they didn't look at him as much of an asset. Like they wanted picks with John Collins to take on his contract. So I'm sure more stuff will come out over the next couple of days. And on Tuesday, we'll have even more insights to this stuff. Let's talk about Saddiq Bey being gone first, Omari, because I kind of wrote a list of pros and cons. And my first con was Saddiq Bey is gone. Like I like Saddiq. I feel like we've been fairly critical of his game, the inconsistency, the defense, needing to find his flow as a shooter, all of those things. What are the Pistons like? How do you feel like the Pistons, are they going to miss Saddiq? Like, what is this going to mean moving forward, not having Saddiq around and kind of like putting a cap and a bow on his tenure with Detroit over the last 2.5 years?
Saddiq will be missed. I mean, he was liked in the organization. He was liked in the locker room. Of course, he came in along with Isaiah Stewart and Killian Hayes, and he's kind of been here since the start of this restoring. So anytime you see a trade like that, I think there's going to be, some tough emotions and stuff to see a guy like that trade. I mean, Sadiq's just a great guy. Like I've never heard anybody say anything bad about him. I think this was purely a basketball trade. I think you just look at what he provides on the floor, and his improvement has kind of come in starts and fits, right? He was cold for most of the season up until maybe a month ago. He was still cold starting off last season, and at the end of the day, I think it was just a basketball move. But I don't think this was a we hate Saddiq Bey trade or anything. I think it really more so speaks to just how highly they think of James Wiseman, how highly Detroit thinks of James Wiseman, and just their belief that long term this could be a more transformational trade for the Pistons than just hanging on to that contract for Saddiq, right? So I think that's really what it comes down to. But Saddiq was like, I don't think this was a trade that they made lightly. I think they did it understanding that this would probably be something that, and I've been on Twitter today. You've been on Twitter that a lot of people probably would not have a very positive gut reaction to.
Well, and even before we get into Wiseman, what I found interesting with Bey is like how many people are upset. Like all of a sudden now the blame is on Coach Casey and the staff. Like they didn't develop Saddiq Bey into this player that he's supposed to be. And my thing with Saddiq is I wonder what his role is going to be in Atlanta. Now, I don't know, we'll get to talk to Lauren. That's pretty cool for Lauren Williams, who was a beat writer with you guys here in Detroit, now down in Atlanta. She gets to cover Saddiq. But, at some point I'd like to reach out. Like what he ain't going to start in Atlanta, Omari. And they have AJ Griffin, they have Jalen Johnson, they have Bogdanovich, the other Bogdanovich. I'm just really interested to see what Saddiq's role is for that team, how many minutes he gets. And that's going to be a playoff team, I assume. And so it'll be interesting. We'll finally get to see, is Saddiq Bey a playoff, caliber player? Is he a playoff caliber defender? So I think we will find a lot about Saddiq here moving forward the rest of the season. So I think it's interesting right now, the conversation around Saddiq, and it's like the organization didn't grow him the way they should. All of the, should he have expanded his game? Should he have thrived in his role? Like, I don't know. Some of that conversation is just interesting to me. Maybe that's something we can break down more on Tuesday.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was maybe a lot of belief from the fan base, at least, that Saddiq had a lot of untapped potential that he was still getting into. And, I think the thing about potential is you kind of have to show it. And Saddiq, I think you could look at what he did this season. And I wrote it in my story. He was sub 40% overall and around, I think, 31% from three over his first 40 games. It's not the first time he had that type of slow start. Definitely not a decision that they made lightly. And we'll dive into questions here soon. But this was a conversation starter. I think that we knew that they probably were going to trade Bogdanovic and Burks. And going into the deadline, I probably would have said I could see a deal. I don't know if Saddiq would have been that guy. So definitely a surprise, definitely a trade that has gotten people talking. And we got a lot of great questions, and it's been cool to see the early interaction we've gotten so far. So I just want to say also big thanks to everybody for joining us live.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for everybody tuning in. We really appreciate it. This is obviously our second live. The last one was a huge success, and hopefully this one will be as well. Let's talk about James Wiseman, because I think at the end of the day, this is what this trade comes down to. A lot of people are upset about Saddiq Bey right now, Omari. If James Wiseman becomes what James Wiseman was thought to become when he was the number 2 overall pick in that same draft, it's not going to matter. And at the end of the day, let me just get my frustration out right now. I see a lot of people, and people I think are extremely smart, and I respect very much, and I know their knowledge of basketball and the Pistons, that are saying like Wiseman has no chance of being good. I just want to give a couple stats, Omari. Wiseman has played 60 games in his career. He has played 1,098 minutes in his NBA career. If he averaged 25 minutes a game, that's only 44 games played. Essentially, this guy has played half of his rookie season. And the fan base, a lot of the fan base preached patience with Killian Hayes, but yet we're not going to give patience to James Wiseman when he's in the same scenario that Killian Hayes was last year. And for reference, Killian Hayes, Omari, has played 3.5 times as many minutes as James Wiseman, 3,700. And Saddiq has played 6 times as many minutes, 6,113. So I just wanted to get those numbers out there, that if you want to question James Wiseman, that's fine. But don't tell me we already know without a shadow of a doubt that he isn't any good. You cannot tell me that.
No, we don't. And I'll say that, and I'll also add to that and say that when I initially tweeted that he was first on Troy Weaver's draft board, and I would say probably 85% of the comments were like, well, that makes me feel worse about Troy, even though this is like a 3-year-old draft board, right? And James Wiseman was also top 5 on most draft boards, so it's not really that wild of a take. He was the 2nd overall pick, and he was drafted by an organization in the Golden State Warriors, who have probably drafted the best of any organization over the last decade, or even before that. When you look at Clay and Steph Curry and the guys who kind of formed this core that they have now.
Draymond in the second round.
Jordan Poole, they have a very long track record for success. They took him number 2. So I was surprised that people kind of took the tweet that way. For one, when I tweeted that, I didn't think the deal was going to go down. It became clear a little bit later, like, oh, actually, this might actually go down, right? But it caught me off guard that so many people were like, that makes me have less faith in Trey Weaver. If the trade makes you have less faith, you're entitled to your opinion. But the reveal that he was on top of the draft board 3 years ago, putting less faith, was a confusing reaction to me because he was universally considered a top 5 prospect.
He was on everybody's draft board.
And, and a lot of people had him number 1, like a lot of reputable draft pundits other teams. Like, this is a guy who came in with that level of clout. So that's not really like he has to live up to expectations. But you mentioned the lack of minutes played, and also, like, it's not like he had a guy who was like the 37th pick that was like number 1 on his board. Like number 2 pick was number 1 on his board. Like, I don't understand retroactively saying, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing because he was number 1 when Wiseman hasn't played due to injury and the situation he's in. And also he was absolutely that level of prospect. Like, to me, that's not controversial at all. I was just surprised that people were saying that. But I agree. We haven't seen him play. And I think longer term, like, he unquestionably has a chance to impact games more than Saddiq has for the Pistons. So it really is an upside swing. It may not work, but I think the bottom line is Troy Weaver looked at it and said, you know what? I ended up with 3 guys in 2020 who might end up being good players, but none of these guys are truly moving the needle for us yet. So I just turned the 19th pick into the 2nd overall pick, and this was my number 1 guy. So I think Detroit, this is like a pretty clear win, right? And I think you can look at the logic and say that this is a pretty logical trade from a pure basketball standpoint when you divorce the equity that I think Saddiq Bey built with the fan base.
I get a little nervous about the Warriors' depth, Omari. That's where I start to question this move. Because here's the other thing. Wiseman only played 3 games in college also. So, like, that's another thing we have to factor in is he hasn't played a lot of games and a lot of minutes in general. And reading scouting reports was, this is a guy that just needs reps. He needs reps. And then he hasn't got him in the NBA. But Omari, the Warriors' bigs are literally Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, and Jonathan Kuminga. And so that's if I'm going to be critical of this in terms of the move of an asset that in Saddiq Bey that is at least an NBA caliber player. And we know that it's established through 6,000 minutes and 200 games played. We trade that for a guy that, again, we don't know, but why he's healthy right now. Why has he not been able to crack that rotation? Why were they willing to give up on him now when one injury to Kuminga and they have no big whatsoever? And it looked like money was a reason, but then this trade continued to evolve and GP2 came back. Shout out GP2. I love his game and I'm glad he's back with Golden State. But now that money thing isn't even as much of a factor. So that's what I find interesting. Like, if there's one thing where I'm like, man, this is kind of weird, it's that the Warriors gave up on him in this situation.
And I do think a good amount of that was just simply fit, because Wiseman's game, so he's 7 feet tall, super athletic, and he looks like a guy that does not need the ball on offense. And granted, he probably could play that way as well, right? Just basically Durant. Like, you're not going to necessarily run plays for Durant. He's going to clean up lobs, and he's going to, offensive rebound, putbacks and whatnot, run the floor in transition. And Wiseman can do those things. But in high school, we only saw him for 3 games in college, but in high school, the word coming out was that he plays like Chris Bosh. Like, this guy,
I saw that comp too.
Plays with the ball. You could post him up. He can hit mid-range shots. He can expand his range, maybe eventually become a 3-point shooter. And he is a guy that if he really begins to tap into his potential, you can run plays for him. And he can make plays with the ball. And I think just from a pure fit with Golden State, who, they have like a motion offense, everything runs through Steph, obviously. And it requires, essentially like a lot of guys who can make things happen without the ball. Like Wiggins gets in and his role changes entirely, right? It's a good system because you have a guy in Steph Curry who has that type of gravity. And I just don't know if Wiseman, when you just look at one, he's still learning the game defensively, and he has the tools to be a great defender, but he's not right now. And offensively, he's probably going to want the ball a little bit. I just, like, stylistically, I just wondered if a lot of that was more so fit and not maybe a talent issue, right? It's just Golden State saying, we're trying to win. This is not going to work. And we're not going to pay $119 million in tax or whatever it was to keep him on, which from them, value standpoint, probably doesn't work out to use the number 2 pick on a guy that you trade 2.5 years later. But just from a pure financial and a pure basketball fit standpoint, I think that was probably the motivator more so for them than just not believing in him.
And at the end of the day, they got GP2 back as part of all of this thing, which they probably wouldn't have been able to do because of the tax would have been just ridiculous taking back his contract. So they opened up that cap space to bring in a player who I think they liked and hated to lose in the offseason. So it's not like they didn't just punt on him for nothing. Like, it opened up the ability to bring him back. I'm going to throw out a few stats here, Omari, from James Wiseman per 36 for his career. Because his rookie year, he actually was pretty decent. But 54% from the field, 33% from three. The three-point touch hasn't come around. The free throw percentage makes you a little nervous that maybe that doesn't ever come around. But essentially, he's been a 20-10 guy in per 36 minutes, Omari. Okay, a 20-10 guy. So it's not like this guy hasn't produced in the minutes he has gotten. His offensive rating is worse than Saddiq Bey, to be fair, but his defensive rating is better, which I do think we need to talk about his defense. His PER is better. Like, there's some advanced metrics that go back and forth if you compare the two. So I just wanted, it's not like this guy hasn't shown anything. That's where I've gotten frustrated, is it's not like he has just completely sucked and never shown any ability to play the game of basketball in the NBA at all. And so, again, like you said, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it doesn't pan out, but there is a little bit of intrigue and reason to be excitement, I think, with this.
Yeah, I agree. I also throw out that another comparison that was kind of thrown around with Wiseman around the time of the draft is Rasheed Wallace. And I think that kind of comes from the fact that Rasheed liked to shoot, and he had the tools to be really good defensively and did eventually become one. And yeah, like, I'm curious to see how Wiseman pans out. I think even like, for me, it's more so just the fact that they have a lot of mouths to feed as far as their big man rotation. So that's what I kind of wonder about, is how does Dwayne make this work when maybe Wiseman can play some power forward next to Durham, maybe he can't, right? Like, I think that's probably what's going to be tough to figure out, but I do expect the Pistons will give him every opportunity to play and show what he can do. And this is a pretty big investment on Troy Weaver's part to have every incentive to do that.
We're going to get to the chat questions starting now, but this is why I like being live and having the video, is if you guys see Omari smiling, it's because me, Omari, and Wes are having a little chat in the private chat on StreamYard. We record this on StreamYard, but it goes to YouTube. Omari's dad asked a question, and Wes asked Omari in the chat what Omari's dad's name was. And Omari was like, Omari Sankofa, we have the same name. And I just put Omari Sankofa in then quotations, the second.
Yeah.
So maybe this is funnier to us, but that's why Omari is laughing. But Wes, after that introduction for you, why don't you join us and ask these questions as they're coming in? And real quick, selfless plug for us, go to shop.freep.com. We finally got merch. It doesn't look exactly like this, but it's somewhat like this. It's bigger, it's cooler, it's better, it looks legit. Shop.freep.com. Wes may be able to put that in the chat on YouTube for you guys. If you want some the Pistons Pulse merchandise, you do have to scroll a little bit. It's got the free press stuff at the top. You can buy that too, of course. But Wes, what's our first mailbag question here?
All right. First question's from Jack Kelly and Slappy Sen. He says, what do you guys basically just make of the report that Wiseman might start?
So, Omari, is that true first? Because I've seen two different things. Like, if he plays well, he could start. Or is it like officially, like, it looks like it's going to be what I assume would be Wiseman and Duren?
Yeah, I haven't heard he's going to start. I checked in on it after I saw the report, and I got, basically he just got here. So, that doesn't mean he won't start, but I haven't heard that he's going to start definitively yet. So we'll see. Personally, I'll be a little surprised if he starts like day one when he gets here, but again, I checked it on it and I didn't hear that. So that's to be determined for me.
So this is the fit thing. And it would be wrong of me to talk about fit here when we're going to talk about Scoot Henderson for the next 4 months. And I say best player available, don't worry about fit, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think that, I don't think it's apples to apples, but it is similar. Like, I don't know that I see Wiseman playing well with Duren. And I don't know that I see Wiseman. I think he fits better with Duren than he does with Marvin Bagley III, to be honest with you. But I think that's what a lot of the fan base has issues with right now, Omari, is how do you play all these guys together? Stu, and even though the shooting's been in a slump, like he at least is playing on the perimeter, none of these other three guys can shoot. Like, we don't even need to talk about Nerlens Noel. I know a question's coming a little bit later, but I don't think he factors into any of this. And we'll talk about whether he's getting bought out or whatever. Do you think Wiseman and Duren can play together, or Wiseman and Marvin Bagley III off the bench, as it does sound like Marvin Bagley III should be returning in the next week or two?
When it comes to all the front court fits, I think Bagley is really the main guy who kind of accurately fits with all of them. I think he could play with Isaiah just because Isaiah, in theory, Isaiah's kind of been in the slump, but he is probably the best shooter of that group. But to me, just the lack of spacing that and rim protection that Bagley provides just makes it tough for him to fit. I do think Wiseman and Duren could play together, but that would rely on Wiseman like really, really shooting the ball, which like he can hit threes here and there, but I don't know if he's like a straight up stretch 5 right now, or stretch 4 or whatever position you want to peg him at. I think one of those guys has to shoot it. It's not going to be Duren, so that would force Wiseman out to the perimeter, and I got to see that before I believe in it.
I wonder if Duren can pass good enough. Like nobody's been higher on his passing than me. I wonder if you can like get him in ball screen, short roll, and then they can play a little like, I guess it would be the new age way of playing some high-low game with Wiseman in the dunker spot, just being super athletic. I realize, again, spacing could be an issue. I know that's always a worry with this team. But, yeah, I agree. I think those are the two that could play together, which them starting together then would make sense because then, you, like you said, you can play Stu with Marvin Bagley III in the second unit. Let's keep moving forward. Jack, Sloppy, both guys, huge supporters. Appreciate both of you. What's the next question, Wes?
All right, next one is what are the worst median and like the 90% best outcomes to expect from Wiseman in Detroit?
I mean, the worst is it completely flames, right? Like that's a legit possibility, right, Omari?
Yeah, the worst is just that he's not an NBA player. Like he comes in, he looks lost on offense, he can't defend. There's really no way you could play him, and they just don't. And they're just like, this isn't going to work. We're not even going to take him to restricted free agency. It's just done. So that's probably the worst outcome is that he just doesn't stick.
Yeah, I think the median is he's the second unit big. I mean, I think that's a realistic possibility. And maybe I'm a little too optimistic right now, but I think that's fair. I think there's a legit chance that he's at least Marvin Bagley, but a little bit better. And so, like, that would be a second unit big. Maybe he never cracks Jalen Duren. And I mean, if they draft Victor, then it doesn't matter anyway. They're all second unit bigs because Duren and Wemby are starting. But I think that's the median, expectation is he's, like your first big off the bench.
Yeah, I look at a guy like I'm trying to think of an athletic big who is not like a star, but like just a good player. And I don't know how much Isaiah Jackson has shown, but like I just think of like what an ideal version of that would be, where he's bouncy and can shoot a little bit and high energy. You could even throw in, just thinking of some names, maybe like even like a Clint Capella might be too good for like a median outcome. But just
Wiseman's that's better defensively than what Wiseman's going to be, but
a solid rotation big, right? Like he probably won't start. He could back up Duren, but he's going to give you some rim protection, some athleticism. And he's probably Bagley, but probably a little bit better defensively than Bagley. He's got good touch around the rim, gets some mid-range shots, maybe a 3 here and there. To me, like that's his median outcome. It's just good rotation big.
And Bobby, the 90% is he ends up being a starter. Like, again, maybe I'm being too positive, but I just think this is a real outcome. Now, what's the percent of that? I don't know. I haven't watched enough film. I'm going to dive in tomorrow. Luckily, we don't have school tomorrow, so I get to dive into film first thing on a Friday morning of James Wiseman. But I think there's a real possibility that this stuff all clicks. Not everybody could have been wrong about this. Well, I guess they could. People have been wrong before, so I guess they could be wrong. But there's at least the upside there. And I think you touched on it. The defense is where I think there's potential. I was reading a lot of reports. I was talking to people leading up to this. There was a lot of people high on James Wiseman's defense coming into the NBA, Omari. It just hasn't panned out. The awareness hasn't been there. But I did read an article where Steve Kerr was saying that he feels like he's starting to figure out that he's getting better. Now, obviously, it wasn't good enough or they would have kept him. I understand that. But I think there's a defensive potential that I just don't know that's still there with Marvin Bagley III, and the offensive upside is there. So I think the 90% outcome is like he's not maybe a core member, but like he could be a starter. I would still take Jalen Duren's upside. I think Jalen Duren's upside is insane, but I think Wiseman has real starter potential.
Yeah, I think the 90% is probably a guy like Miles Turner or like Brook Lopez, right? Like a guy who could very capably protect the rim, one of the NBA's best rim protectors, and can also knock down outside shots. Like I think that's kind of the 90% outcome for him. The 100% obviously is you're getting into like superstar territory, but but if he taps into most of his potential, we're talking about a pretty good starting center, and there's only so many guys who can protect the rim and space the floor, and those guys, even like a Jaren Jackson, I think he's probably a better rebounder or a better athlete than Jaren, but you just talk about guys who can really, really defend, move in space, and like knocking down outside shots. And those guys just seem to be extremely valuable. So I would put him sort of in that tier if he gets close to his max potential.
I'm glad you said move in space because I was just messing around on synergy with the numbers, and actually he's graded out really well against pick and roll handlers. Now, I haven't watched the film, and defensive metrics, I always am wary of those. So don't take this to heart, but I'm interested to watch tomorrow how much switching he did and how he looked in those switch situations. So here's my question then, Omari. If we're talking about Saddiq Bey, if we're answering these questions for Saddiq Bey, I would say Saddiq Bey's worst outcome probably isn't as bad as James Wiseman. His median, I don't know, probably similar, maybe a little bit lower, but I don't think his 90% outcome is as high as what we just said about James Wiseman. Would you agree?
No, I would agree with that. I think a lot of the stuff with Saddiq is he doesn't give you a lot or anything on defense, and I think that really knocks down his potential. There was some, like if we're, and even like last year on the pod, we're throwing out like best case scenarios, and you throw out like Chris Middleton and whatnot. But Chris Middleton can defend, but he's also a really good playmaker for a forward. And Saddiq progressed as a playmaker, and also the defense just hadn't been there. So I would say probably not 90% for Saddiq Bey is probably more like a
six man.
I don't know if that'd be like a Kelly Oubre type, but you're just talking about a guy who's going to be able to give you buckets and can really heat up. Like I remember Oubre hit like 9 or 10 threes in a game.
That's only against the Pistons, Omar.
But it would be that type of outcome, right? Where he's just a bucket getter. He'll always have a role in the NBA. He'll heat up, have some big nights, but he's given up enough that it's always going to knock his ceiling down a little bit.
And I do want to say, and I know some people don't care about this, but like this stuff does. Wiseman is 22, will turn 22 in March, and Saddiq will turn 24 in April, I believe. So Saddiq is legit 2 years older than James Wiseman, plus all the other minutes of NBA game experience and all of that. So I just want to continue to reiterate, we have a currently 21-year-old who has only played 1,000 minutes in the NBA in his career and only had 3 games of college. So we're talking about a very, very raw prospect still. Now, if you're worried about the organization being able to develop players and all that, that's a different conversation. But thank you, Bobby. More importantly, Bobby, thank you for the soccer information about Omari at Michigan State. What do we got next, Wes?
All right, next one. I'm going to twist this one a little bit since we were kind of talking about the potential with Wiseman anyway. So RB's wondering long-term if we think the best, or not the best, but the vision for Wiseman would be to be a starter.
I think so. I think I would say if he reaches his potential, that he's absolutely a starter. I don't think the Pistons see anything for him per se. I think the logic for the trade was just he was the number 2 pick for a reason, and he hasn't played, and he was drafted by a team that probably couldn't properly utilize him and give him the minutes he needed to fully develop. And I think the Pistons would hope that all these guys reach their potential, right? If you have 2 starting bigs and you have to trade a guy at some point, then you just trade one. But I think the Pistons just want to develop both of these guys. I don't necessarily think they see Wiseman and Duran as like the forecourt of the future. If they develop that way, perfect. But I think they just took a flyer on Wiseman because they really believe in his potential and they believe that he has a chance to live up to that draft position from a few years ago. So if it works out with him starting with Duran, cool, but I don't think they are necessarily going to come out and say, this is our starting front court of the future, because it may not work out that way. And then you just said that for no reason. So I don't think they're going to do that. And I don't think they're going to place those expectations right off the bat.
Thank you. Shout out RB. He's a huge supporter, always interacts with us on Twitter. Great stuff. Really appreciate him and all of his support. And I'll just say, you can't pencil anybody in at the 4 as a starter, because if you get the number 1 overall pick, that is Victor Wembanyama's spot. So at the end of the day, you could draft Victor and then you have Stu and Wiseman coming off the bench, or if Wiseman doesn't pan out, maybe it's Stu and Bagley still, or maybe you're back in the market for another one. But I'm with you, Omari. I think it would make sense for them just to be like, hey, we're just going to develop this guy. Maybe they felt like the Warriors didn't have the patience for it, or just the usage for him. I mean, look, this is way dramatic, but look at what Cam Thomas is doing for the Brooklyn Nets right now. I just looked, Cam Thomas played 67 games, averaged 17 minutes a game, and scored 8.5 points last season, had only played 30-some games, and then he gets this high usage, and he's dropped 3 40-point games in a row. I'm not saying Wiseman is going to do that by any means. I'm just saying that sometimes these young guys do get in situations where they aren't able to flourish and show everything, and maybe a change of scenery will open up some opportunities for Wiseman.
Yeah, and that's been Troy. We resent Mo. He said a lot of the same stuff, and they traded for Bagley, and they traded for other guys. Hami, you get a guy in, you give him a chance to succeed, right? You give him the resources and every tool he needs to thrive. And it may not work out, but that's just been his MO is we're going to get players in. We're going to take a look at them, to use this phrase, get our hands on them, just really get them involved and see what happens. So this is the same thing. I don't think they're going to, Christian James Wiseman as the savior for the rebuild or whatever, but they are going to give him opportunities to thrive and succeed and find his voice here.
And I do want to say real quick, I was reading an article that it sounds like Wiseman's a great dude. Like, the organization loved him in Golden State. He was a hard worker, like all of those things. And I'm sure you can find those reports about most players, but you can also find reports the other way about some guys. And I mean, I didn't dig deep, but the couple articles I did read sound like he was a really good and had a really good personality. I'm really intrigued at whenever you guys get media with him and get a chance to interview him, like what your perspective is, just his personality. Because I do know just from talking to you and being, a media member for a few games so far that, different guys do have different personalities. Some open up more, some don't. Some are, more involved in the locker room. So it sounds like he's just kind of got a big booming personality that's, super positive. So, maybe another welcome to the locker room.
All right, next one up. So this is Prince Zimri's wondering what the rotation is going to look like the rest of the year with Wiseman and Duren and Stu, and obviously Bagley's coming back soon too.
So I think one thing about this season, when you just kind of look at the rotations, is this roster, and we're not counting Nerlens, really only has one guy who can protect the rim, and that's Duren, and he's a rookie, right? So he's still learning things. So now you have two guys who are legit centers, and you could have Wiseman back up Duren, and that's probably fine, right? But you could always have a lob threat on the floor. There's been a lot of talk about whatever guard comes off the bench doesn't get to play with Duren as much, and now you just got to fix that. Like now Killian Killian's back in the starting lineup now, but that'll continue to shift as the year goes on. You always have that type of athleticism on the floor. And those two guys may not start next to each other, or may cut into Bagley's minutes, and some of the stuff we're just going to have to see. But I guess the other thing along with that is I think now Bogey is a 3 on his team. I know Dwayne's talked about not wanting to play him at the 4 just because you give up a little bit of size and rebounding, and now he is a 3. And now Wiseman essentially takes a lot of those Bay minutes, and because of that, I probably see Isaiah Stewart being a full-time 4 now. And I think that's probably how it's going to shake out. So does Wiseman start? I really don't know. I think if Wiseman starts, that kind of creates some more rotation issues on top of what you already have. But he could just really slot in pretty well as the backup 5. And, now Stewart's your 4. You don't have him trying to fight amongst the trees down there. And it could work out pretty cleanly, honestly. Maybe everybody doesn't get as much minutes as they want, but I think just from a pure fit standpoint, you have 2 athletic, bouncy centers on the roster, and you can just leave it at that and just leave Stewart at the 4 and Bagley. And Marvin Bagley as your 4. And some of those may be spacing challenge, but you can probably – they have 14 wins. I mean, I think it'll be fine in the long run as far as this season.
Well, it also opens minutes for Livers and Hami, right? There's no more logjam there at that position. And no matter what you think about those guys, and I've been critical of Isaiah Livers' play so far this season. I want to see him playing better, but now we're going to get a real look at Isaiah Livers, Hamidou Diallo, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent. I kind of wonder if it's a 9-man. So you have Cade obviously out, Magruder, Kojo, and Noel, who – whatever happens with those guys, but I don't think they're really rotation guys. There is an open space or an open roster spot after this trade because of how it went down. But Hayes, Ivy, Boyan, Stu, Duren start. You can stagger Hayes and Ivy. Then you get Burks, Hami, Livers, and Wiseman off the bench. That's a nice little 9-man rotation. Livers can play some spot minutes at the 4 when Stu isn't. When Bagley comes back, again, maybe it gets a little bit awkward. But I think that gives Hami and Livers some time to play. And to your point, now there's no reason that a lob threat shouldn't always be on the floor, which that's the thing with Killian Hayes, right? Everybody thinks Killian Hayes has to have a lob threat to be successful. Killian Hayes fans should be ecstatic, on Thursday night. Here's the other thing that opens, or the other thing that Troy Weaver has done that fans used to complain about was athleticism, right? Well, in the last how many ever months, you've added Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Hami's been around for a little bit, James Wiseman. The athleticism on the floor for the Detroit Pistons has definitely increased in the last 12 months.
And I really do think we will see moments from James Wiseman that's that's why he was the number 2 pick, right? I noticed a lot of times when trades first happen, people have an immediate backlash. I remember last year when the Grizzlies swapped or maybe it was 2 years ago now, I forget. But when the Grizzlies swapped Jonas Valanciunas for Steven Adams.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, they traded for Jonas Valanciunas when I was there, and he came in for Marc Gasol, and you had fans who were tied to Marc Gasol, and I think generally people understood it's time to move on, but there's some backlash because it's like, but this guy's not Marc, so I hate him. And then he comes in and everybody loves him, right? And then they trade Jonas, and everybody's like, oh, well, I hate Steven Adams because he's not Jonas, and now they love Steven Adams. I really do think once people see some of the things James Wiseman could do, you may still miss Saddiq Bey, and I'm not saying, you'll still think the trade will work out, but I do think when you have that role, you'll see we'll see flashes of some of the playmaking Wiseman has, some of the shooting. And if you see those things, that gives even more flexibility, right? Because now you can play him with the 4 or 5. And then you mentioned everything with Hami and Livers as well. This does clear up more time for other guys. So I think rotationally it seems kind of murky, but I think in action they could probably end up working out a lot better than we're envisioning right now.
I don't know. I don't think it can work. The spacing wouldn't be great, but Ivy, Hami, Wiseman, and Duren on the floor together is a lot of athleticism for a team that 12 months ago didn't have anywhere close to the ability to put that amount of athleticism on the floor. So again, I don't know if it'd be successful, but like if you wanted to get after it defensively and cause some havoc and get out in transition, that would be a lot of fun. We got probably 10 minutes here, guys. Thank you again, everybody that's tuned in, listening, watching. Wes, let's go rapid fire here. I know I get long-winded as much as anybody, but we'll try to go a little rapid fire here with the questions that are left.
All right, next one. We've got this from a lot of people, including the earlier mentioned OG Omari Sankofa. So there's an open roster spot now. Any ideas on how they're going to fill it up?
I think that remains to be seen. There's some talk about the buyout market being pretty robust, and we kind of have to see what that entails. I don't expect the Pistons will be super interested in the John Wall or a
hold up. John Wall back in Houston is the most underrated aspect of the day. I know we guys stay on Piston stuff today, but like that is mind blowing to me after some of the interviews that have come out.
Yeah, that was when I was like, oh, like after all this, he ends up back. And but I think but we will see. I think if there's a young wing who is the market with some defensive upside, we can see Pistons go after a player like that. That's very much a TBD. I think the buyout market is so fresh. A lot of that is, let's see who becomes available first. But absolutely, I think they'll use that roster spot for something.
I want to turn this, and thank you to everybody that asked, including the OG Omari Sankofa, Omari's dad. Like, we getting to know his mom, his dad. They all participate. My parents got to step up their game. Like, they may be watching. I don't know. I sent them the link, but I'm not sure if they know how to use YouTube. Like, they're super old, and I'm not really sure. So I'll find out if they're watching here in a few minutes. If I get a text message or phone call that they're mad I called them out on the broadcast. But what is going to happen with Nerlens Noel and Corey Joseph, Omari? We've talked about this. I didn't feel like they were going to be here after the deadline. Do you think that something works? And there we go. So go ahead and read the question, Wes.
Yeah, well, you just transitioned right into it, so I figured I'd throw it up. Basically, are they going to buy out Noel this year, or just kind of let him finish out the season and decline that team option?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he's got the team option this summer. You can see him as an insurance option. You can just easily decline the team option and just take the cap space this summer. If he doesn't want to take the buyout, then he probably doesn't have a lot of incentive to leave money on the table. So I think that's a TBD as well. I wouldn't be shocked to see a buyout, but I got a lot of questions earlier, like why didn't they trade Nerlens? And I think the question of that is, how many teams were going to, essentially give up an asset, to acquire him, and how many contenders have a situation where they can absorb his contract, and you realize that list is pretty scant. So he's here. I mean, he hasn't played a whole lot, but. To me, that's kind of up to him, right? If he wants to take a buyout, he can do that and go somewhere else, or he could just become a free agent this offseason. But the Pistons don't need the roster spot now. Like, they have an additional roster spot. They'll need two. So wouldn't be shocked if they just carry him into the offseason and then decline that option.
Yeah, and I mean, Keith Smith told us, right? We asked him what the market for Nerlens Noel was, and he said the buyout market. And so, at that point, I think neither of us expected. What's crazy, though, is second-round picks were flying around all over the place today. I think I saw somewhere that it said it was the most second-round picks that have been traded on NBA trade deadline. It's surprising that you couldn't at least get a second-round pick for him, but you never know how these things work out. So you're right. I just don't know. It'll be interesting if Nerlens wants out. And if there's, a team out there, a contender that has use for him or wants him, and if not, then he probably just takes his money, finishes out the season the way it's been going now, and very much anticipate the Pistons will declined that option in the offseason. I do want to make a quick note that this trade did lower their available salary in the offseason, their salary cap, $4 or $5 million, I think, because Knox was a couple million. Bey was, Wiseman's contract is way higher than Bey's based off where he got drafted, even though they're in the same draft. And then you add on a couple million for Knox. So I think it was like 5 or 6 million range is all it lowers. Not a big deal, grand scheme of things, but it was worth mentioning.
Yeah, it does. The Pistons still have a lot of cap space, so it probably won't change their plans too much.
All right, next up, a little draft question for us. If the Pistons do draft 3 to 5, who's the best Saddiq Bey replacement?
Bryce, I see you smiling. I'll let you go ahead.
No, we've been waiting to get into the draft, and actually,
I know you're excited to talk to the draft. That's why I'm like, Bryce, I'm gonna let you start this.
You're ready, or you're not ready? Did you say you are ready or not ready?
No, I'm ready. I'm ready to hear who you would take 3 through 5.
Okay, so I still got Amin Thompson, number 3. Victor Scoot, I got him in. Brandon Miller's right there, and I know that's a name that Pistons fans are probably familiar with, especially if you're on Twitter, because Rafael Barlow, a very respected NBA draft analyst, NBA Locked On Big Board, essentially said, like, even at number 2, he would consider taking Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson because of fit, but also, and then this was after talking to Rafael as well, that like the gap between those guys isn't as far as some make it out to be. Now, for me, it still is, but, obviously Rafael knows his stuff. So those are 2 guys. Cam Whitmore, another Villanova guy, is someone that would slot into that. Asar Thompson, which is Amin's twin brother, overtime elite. Those guys are such a hard evaluation because of the program they're playing for. I don't know. It's scary, but you talk about let me tell you this. You add Amin Thompson or Asar Thompson to the lineup I just said, and it's athleticism out. Like that, it'd be hard to compete with that in the NBA anywhere. Amin is a top 1% athlete in the NBA day one. Shooting is the question mark with those guys. Brandon Miller would be intriguing because he can really score it. He's shooting the heck out of the ball right now. So those are a few names that are in that range right now.
I agree with that, and I will say Brandon Miller is by far the player I trust the most in that group. He reminds me of Rashard Lewis, and it's funny, like Rashard is a player, like I was using a comparison for Jabari Smith Jr. last year, and then Rashard Lewis is joining the Pistons as a player development coach. It's been cool being able to get to know him and talk to him a lot this season, but I see a lot of Rashard Lewis and Brandon Miller just as a pure 3-point shooter, and I don't know if he's going to be a superstar in the NBA, but I think he'll be an above-average starter for a long time, and if there's an argument the Pistons should gun for upside, like I think that's fair. I don't like the gunning for upside options in this draft as much. I like Amin Thompson, but I think if he busts, like that's a pretty bad one because for one, you already have a lot of ball handlers, right? You have Ivy, you have Killian, you have Cade, and he's probably a guy that's going to need the ball on offense to make his impact. And maybe after I get past the season, I start diving into draft stuff a little bit more. Really, once I get past. Really now, like I'm past the deadline. So that's when I start to get into the draft stuff a little bit more. So really now. But for me, I just think Brandon Miller fits a clear need for this team. He's a spot-up shooting forward. He's got a little ball skill. I just like his game a lot. And he's the guy that I think if the Pistons were in that 3 through 5 range, I would feel the best taking him by far. I would sleep soundly at night. I wouldn't worry about him, not working out in 2 years. Like it's like a warm blanket pick. Like I would just do that. I would do that.
I love it. And I want to throw out a few more names, Omari, just in case either the Pistons fell further, which they shouldn't be able to fall lower than, it could be 6 or 7, I guess, depending on where they land, or if they happen to get another lottery pick like they did with Jalen Duren. So, a Michigan guy, Jet Howard. Jet Howard's going to be a lottery pick. And I don't know how Michigan fans feel about that. Bryce Sensabaugh at Ohio State is another guy that would, fit really nicely. And Grady Dick at Kansas is a smooth shooter, can really shoot off ball, defense on ball isn't very good. Off ball defense is okay. And, he's like 6'8", so has a little bit of size. So those are some names as well in that range. If you get past like 5 or 6, you get into 7 to 12, and there's a few wings. I like all 3 of those guys. I like Jet Howard. I don't know how Michigan fans feel, but I like Jet Howard. Grady Dick can really shoot it, and Sensabaugh has been sensational as a freshman for Ohio State. So there's some intriguing prospects in that range. And real quick, another name I've seen a lot is Jarris Walker at Houston. Really talented player, plays really hard. I would consider Jarris Walker like what we want Isaiah Stewart to be. So he's not a 3, but he is a good player. Now, it could get a little logjam with him as well, but the draft talk is going to be fun whenever we really dive into that.
we're not too far away from it now. I think people have been kind of ready for it for a few weeks already. So it'd be fun to do that, honestly, pretty soon here now.
Real quick, my mom just texted me. She said, of course, we're watching and on the TV. I'm shocked that they figured out how to put it on the TV. And she said, careful with the age comments. Mom, I love you so much, but you are old. So, but all right, Wes, what do we got next?
All right, next one. This is a two-parter. We've answered already the second. So he's just wondering if there's going to be a Troy Weaver post-trade deadline press conference.
I expect there will be. They haven't announced anything yet, but they just traded for James Wiseman. I'd be shocked if we didn't hear from Troy for the next week or so. What's interesting about the timing of this trade is that the Pistons have a road trip coming up, right? So we leave for Toronto on Saturday, and then we'll be in Toronto and Boston all the way through the beginning of All-Star break. So timing-wise, I'm curious if Pistons would just like do it on Zoom, or if it comes later. Or I would think they would do a press conference. They went for Bagley last year, so I don't see why they would do one for James Wiseman. But that's a TBD. PR hasn't said anything yet, so we'll just have to see.
And I do want to make a note, like Wiseman is ready to play by all accounts. Like he's healthy and ready to play. I think he just played a few nights ago. So, whenever he can get with the team and get up to speed and all that, I assume we'll see him playing fairly soon. Maybe not on Friday night against the Raptors, but maybe he'll join, the team on the road trip after that. So, all right, Wes, again, thank you, Henry. Richard Brooks, another guy, he asked the last question. No Richard from Twitter, always interacting. Again, thank you to everyone watching, everybody that's sending in questions, especially those that have been longtime loyal listeners tuning in every week.
All right, next one up, this is Tyler Thurmond. He's got two questions. So one, he said that sounded like there may have been a deal that was close to getting done at the last minute. He was wondering if you had any details on that. And then how close they were or weren't to dealing Bojan.
I don't think they're really super close. And I think they were involved in a lot of different talks, and there's some stuff with John Collins as well. But once they got that Saddiq Bey trade agreed to, like I think for the most part that was probably, maybe there was some potential of that deal getting a little bit bigger. But I don't think they ever got really that close to trading Bojan Bogdanovic or Alec Burks. Like I was talking to somebody earlier today, and it was just clear like we've refused every deal for these guys. Like it wasn't really like that ambiguous, and that should have been the word just from talking to different people from the team throughout this whole process. Is we're leaning toward keeping these guys. Like we set a high price, and we're without saying it straight up, like we're probably not going to trade these guys. Like we want to keep them and keep them with the core, and it'll take a big deal to pry them away from us. So I really don't think they ever came that close to Dylan Boyan. I don't think a team ever came close to. Even if it's an offer that maybe on paper is a fair offer for Boyan, I don't think the Pistons ever looked at the offer and thought, we really need to do this. No, I think it was always pretty certain that he was going to be here past the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this, right? I think I was more okay with trading Boyan than you were, but even I said I wanted it to be for the right price. There was no need to rush it. And this was one of the cases where the team kept telling us something, team kept telling us something, and it was true. They wanted Boyan. They wanted to keep him around. They were fine bringing him back next year. They think he has a role, and it looks like that is true, at least till the offseason, right? We saw this with Jeremy. This is the same thing that happened with Jeremy Grant. We all thought Jeremy Grant was going to get traded last deadline. He made it through the deadline and then got traded in the offseason. I'm not saying Boyan will, but it's a similar situation as that. So, Wes, you said we got 5 more questions. We're going to try to get to all of them. Since you guys stayed around with us, you're watching with us, tuning in here on your Thursday evening, we're going to get through those 5 questions here before we shut it down.
All right, so moving a little quicker, but this is a little more of a technical question. Jason's wondering if you can sign two-way guys from other teams.
No, I think there is – that's a good – I think once you're on that two-way contract, you're on that two-way contract.
That's what I think as well.
And I would have to get into the rules and make sure that that's the case. But in my top cover DB, I've never seen a two-way guy signed by another team. So I think the contract is that contract. And, until the team parts ways with them, they're under that deal up until that following offseason. So, no, I don't think they could call whoever the Celtics two-way guys are. I don't think they have Taco Fall anymore. Whoever the Celtics two-way guys are and say, hey, we're going to sign this guy to a $5 million deal. I don't think they could do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's kind of the idea, right? Is essentially 2 extra roster spots that you have as members of your organization. It's not like the NFL practice squad where you can sign anybody from an NFL team's practice squad, but you have to put them on your active roster if you do it. I don't think it's that way with the 2. I don't even know if it's that way with G League guys. That would be another question and something to dive into. Maybe we can get a little more clarity on that for Tuesday.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but I think two-way guys, like, that's its own unique contract. And again, I've never seen it. I've never had to actually look up if that's possible, but I've also never had to answer that question because it's never happened. So my guess would be no.
Yeah, there's some guys that are pretty talented on two-way contracts. I think you would be, that would open them up to being stole by, other teams. That doesn't seem like something that the NBA would want happening. But really good question, Jason. And if we're wrong, we'll definitely admit it and have a for sure answer on Tuesday.
All right, next one up. Wondering what the impact of this trade will be on Isaiah Livers.
Yeah, I think it gives him an opportunity to come in and, just do what he does. This has not probably been the season that a lot of people wanted or what he wanted. He's been banged up a little bit, hasn't shot it extremely well. But again, like, we've seen what he could do, right? Like, the game just seemed like it moved really slow for him last season. And, I think the shooting and just the team defense he plays, like, if he could come in and kind of seize those minutes and that role vacated by Saddiq Bey, he can really, I think, secure his future with the team. And that's not to say he's on the precipice of not being with the team at all. I think they view him as a core guy. But from a minutes and opportunity standpoint, I think he's probably in a better situation than he was this time yesterday.
Yeah, and I'm cool with it. The three-point shooting is at 36% right now on 3.5 attempts. And he obviously has to shoot it better for the role he's in. 36% isn't bad. It's not bad. But for the role he has, I think you got to be closer to the 40%. But I do like that he's going to get a chance. What is there, 20 to 30 games left, whatever it is. And he's going to get a chance to play major minutes. He essentially has to. I mean, with the wing depth, him and Hami have to play a lot of minutes. And I'm cool with both of that. Hami has played really well. Livers hasn't, so they're kind of in different places, but I'm definitely up for seeing more minutes from those guys. Again, it gives you a chance to make a for sure decision on Hami as he's an unrestricted free agent, and Livers gets real consistent rotation minutes to find out what his contributions can be. So as far as just like a tertiary, aspect of this, more minutes for those guys is something I'm encouraged by and positive about.
This is a little more of a retrospective one, but Andrew's wondering if getting Bogey on the team really might have hurt Bey's development early on and then kind of, led into this trade.
I don't think so. It is not uncommon for rookies to be drafted into situations where they're not the best guy on the team or automatically given the minutes that Saddiq Bey had. If that got into his head a little bit, I think only Saddiq Bey knows, right? But I think the way the season played out for him is not dissimilar to how it played out for him last season either. That inconsistency, like, we saw it before this season, so I don't know if that was necessarily a consequence of Bogey. I think that's just, Saddiq and his development, learning how to bring it every single night. So I wouldn't say that. I think at the end of the day, he did start the season out in the starting lineup. He still had an opportunity to show what he could do. And he's never been out of the rotation. He's always gotten those minutes and still got the same work behind the scenes and all that. I would say if Bogey coming to the team hurt Bey's development, then I don't think that is a mistake the Pistons made. And I did kind of sit out on Twitter a little bit like, well, they didn't give Bey a chance to succeed because they brought Bogey in and this and that. It's like, it's the NBA. Like, if you're not a superstar, there's always going to be somebody better. And even then, like, Kyrie's not the best player on this team, right? Like, like, that's just how it's going to be. And, typically it's on you to develop and handle whatever situation or whatever role you're in. So I wouldn't say that. Like, most teams have multiple guys that can shoot the ball, or, good teams have multiple guys that can create their own shot. And, good players typically figure it out. Like, I don't think it hurt his development. I think it's just, that's just something Saddiq's had to deal with, is just inconsistency. But I don't think Bogey necessarily is the reason why. I think even without Bogey, it still probably could have played out pretty similarly this season.
Well, it's kind of like what we talked about with Killian Hayes, right? If a player has to, especially a role player, has to be in this just perfectly vacuum situation to be successful, then what kind of NBA role player are they? And so if Saddiq can't play with another good wing, well, then, like, how good of a role player is he in this league? And so, and another thing I've found out today, and I'm not saying I'm right, I'm not saying anybody else is wrong, but I tend to put the responsibility on the player's individual improvement more than the coaching staff or the organization or whatever. And I realize there's situations where they aren't put in, successful situations. Marvin Bagley goes stand in the corner, Sacramento Kings. But in general, I put that growth on the player. And just looking at his per 36 minute, like, field goal attempts, Omari, his rookie year, he only got 13. Last year, 15.1. This year, 14.5.
I was going to mention that. Yeah,
like, so it's not like his attempts have gone down. His rebounds are essentially the same.
Still played 29 minutes a game, even with, going between his first and second unit. I think a lot of times when guys but their development is hurt is because they just weren't playing. Like they traded for another guy, and now you're like, maybe you play 10 minutes or whatever. Like that can affect your confidence. Saddiq was still playing a lot of minutes. It's not like the Pistons were like, oh, we got Bogey, so buy you play 5-10 minutes maybe if you're lucky. Like you're still in their rotation, you still by all means absorb core starter guy minutes. So no, like I think and not to cut you off, Bryce, but I think his role was still probably bigger than it was when he was a rookie. Honestly, when you just look at the pure minutes played and shot attempts per game.
Yeah, as I say, he played more minutes in his rookie year, more field goal attempts. The 3-point attempts were down a little bit, more free throw attempts. Assists were up a little bit. His assists, that's the thing that dropped, right? Last year, we were really excited about the assists. It actually went down from last year.
It's like cut in half from last year almost.
Yeah. Effective field goal percentage is actually gone down each year. So, I mean, I guess this is a long way of saying no. I don't think either of us thinks that that's like an overwhelming reason that he, stayed the same player. I hate to say this about a guy that's only going to be 24, but I feel like he is who he is. And that's okay. I still think that that's a quality NBA player. And the Pistons decided that a quality NBA player was worth trading for a flyer on a guy who we talked about earlier has pretty high upside, who's only 22 years old right now and only played 1,100 minutes. So I think that's what this is about, kind of as you have outlined as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the Pistons, because they've been so developmentally focused, on a lot of teams, they would not have gotten the run that he's had this season.
Sure.
Like I think some teams just would have said, you're shooting, 35% from three and 30% overall, and we're trying to win. So, we don't have the patience to give you that role. The Pistons I think they've been patient with all their young guys. Like Killian, like all their guys have been given ample opportunity to show what they could do. So I think with the team in general, I don't know why there's a perception that guys haven't been given opportunities to thrive, but they absolutely have. I mean, you look at the numbers. I don't think that's true at all. All these guys have been given plenty of time.
I think the argument, there's not good players around. Well, it's a rebuild. You're right. This roster isn't that talented. You're absolutely right. But I think some of the things that we complained about, myself included, Weaver has addressed. 2 years ago, a year ago at the trade deadline, what was the biggest complaint? That there was no lob threat. Marvin Bagley III, Jalen Duren, James Wiseman. In 12 months, Troy Weaver went out and got 3 lob threats so that Killian Hayes and, it would have been Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey never have to play without a lob threat. The shooting is still a thing, but they added Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. Those are two of the best shooters. 2 elite shooters. What else? The best player on the team isn't playing. That's why the team sucks even worse than what it should.
Yeah, and there's a trade-off for everything. You can't have the right environment for guys to develop and still high and get assets, like those things. And I'm not saying the same people are – some of the same people are saying that. I think maybe 2 different crowds, but you have to pick a direction, basically. You can't have a good, well-rounded team of veterans and all these guys who can help guys succeed and be the perfect environment and also sell high and get certain guys, right? You trade Bogey, you trade Burks. Now your best shooter on the roster is who? I mean, you don't really have one, and then you kind of compound a lot of the issues that we saw on this team in the past. So, I think sometimes we kind of get our wires crossed with the criticisms, and we're kind of going off on a tangent a little bit. But long story short, I think Bey and all the other young guys on the team have been given plenty of opportunity to succeed. And at the end of the day, if Bey and other guys kind of want those roles, then they're going to have to find ways to thrive wherever they are and who they're playing next to, because teams are always going to trade for better players. I mean, if you're not LeBron James or Jokic or somebody else, there's always going to be somebody better than you. That's just part of the beat in the NBA.
Well, and we'll find out. Like I said, with Saddiq, we're going to find out because he's playing with a pretty talented roster. So I think we got a couple more, Wes. Let's get to them.
Yes, 2 more. This next one's a little lighter. I don't know. I thought it was kind of funny. He was wondering if Saddiq or Wiseman get paid more on their rookie extension.
So that is a good question, because that is essentially a timeline question where does Wiseman
figure it out?
Does Wiseman figure it out before? Well, I guess the real question is, do either of these guys sign extensions? There's a good chance neither of them do, and then they, they're going to restrict the free agency next year. But if it's today, I think Saddiq would, I guess by by August or, whenever guys would sign these extensions, who would get more? I would say I think Sadiq's just done more. So probably him, Wiseman would have to show a lot in the next 2 months to probably surpass whatever Saddiq gets. Let's say Saddiq gets 14, 4 years or whatever. So, that's $56 million. Wiseman is not a 56 over 4 years player right now. So, if I had to bet, I'd say probably Saddiq. But, I think this, I think because Wiseman doesn't have a lot of time to show what he can do before the extension, and it kind of just favors Saddiq just because he's been better up to this point. So I would say Saddiq.
So those extensions will have to be signed before next season starts, correct?
Before next season starts, I'm kind of approaching it as
so it has to be Saddiq.
Yeah, it has to be Saddiq more than likely.
James Wiseman's not going to have the chance. He would have to go crazy here for the end of the year which I guess is possible, but I feel like it's going to be Saddiq because of that. I almost feel like Wiseman doesn't get an extension and, he'll go into restricted free agency, qualifying offer, all that stuff that, a rookie would do. So that I think to answer the question is Saddiq, but it's a good question. Again, I don't know if this is Laz or not, but if it is, Laz always brings some really good questions.
Yeah, no, it's a good thought experiment. Like how much can James Wiseman show to secure that type of deal? Because I think the deadline is October. Mid-October. And here's the thing. I know I keep going back to this. What if Saddiq isn't part of their playoff roster? What if Griffin and Jalen Johnson outplay him, or they go 8 deep? And what extension are the Hawks going to give Saddiq Bey if he's not part of the rotation outside of when they play 10 guys, if he's not part of the playoff rotation? So I think Saddiq could actually end up getting less money in Atlanta than what he may have got with Detroit. This may have hurt Saddiq Bey's pockets, or he may blow up, be their sixth man, and earn even more. Obviously, could go either way. So I still think the right answer, the betting answer, is Saddiq Bey, just because Wiseman doesn't have enough games to really showcase that. And if Wiseman blows up, he's probably better off playing next season out, blowing up, continuing to blow up, and then really demanding something in true free agency, restricted free agency. And I would think that he would probably, for that reason, he would have every incentive to go into restricted free agency and let the market pay him rather than the Pistons saying, hey, we have 6 first-round picks for this team. Do you want to take a hometown discount, right? He's probably no, I'm the second overall pick. I'm James Wiseman, former 5-star. I'm going to go get my money. So extension probably favors Saddiq making more. Restricted free agency probably favors Wiseman making more.
All right, Wes, last one.
All right, last one. This is from RB again. Wondering if there's any chance Wiseman plays tomorrow.
No, no, there is not. There is not. He would. I wouldn't even be shocked if the trade doesn't get announced tomorrow. Just because it's a process to get guys in and pass the physical and all that. The earliest probably Sunday when they're in Toronto playing the Raptors.
All right, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I did that bull breakdown and then he didn't pass the physical. So I hope I don't watch a whole bunch of James Wiseman film tomorrow. We had all this conversation and then the trade doesn't go through. But thank you again to everybody for tuning in tonight and watching with us. If you're listening on the podcast on Friday or over the weekend, thank you to all of you as well. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, make sure you give it a rating, leave a review, hit us up on Twitter, comments, wherever. We check the Freep comments, we check the DBB comments. So if you have some nice words, or maybe you don't have some nice words for us, we're always checking that out and reading it. Again, shop.freep.com if you want some Pistons Pulse gear. Thank you, Wes, as always, man. You crushed it. Omari, I hope you have the outline up and ready to go. Take it away, my guy.
Yeah, I do not have the outline.
I knew it. I was going
yeah, what's up, is this? 52, 53? It's 52. You know what? But I already know most of it by heart, right? So shout out to our editor, Robin Chan.
There we go.
Our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado.
Yes.
And our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford.
Let's go.
And also shout out Wes Davenport. We'll talk to you all on Tuesday.